Senator Whitehouse just exposed something that should terrify every American who believes in equal justice. The Attorney General of the United States sat before Congress and made what he called demonstrably false statements. The same day, a former FBI director was arraigned for lying to this very committee. This isn't politics as usual. It's a double standard that strikes at the heart of our justice system.
Here's the second thing, and this goes back to the ranking member's comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony that the day before the United States Department of Justice arraigned a former FBI director for allegedly making untruthful statements to this committee, the Attorney General of the United States sat right there and made untruthful statements to this committee. And they weren't maybe untruthful statements. This wasn't a question of nuance. She made allegations about the ranking member and me having received political contributions from some, she said, Epstein close confidant. Well, guess what? That's actually checkable. There's a thing called the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission keeps a website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer. It's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the Fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the D.C. Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the Federal District Court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast. I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark. Thank you, Chairman.
What Senator Whitehouse did in that hearing was more than political theater. It was a methodical dissection, how justice dies when there are different rules for different people. He didn't just point fingers, he laid out a pattern of false statements and institutional protection that should alarm anyone who believes the law applies equally to everyone. The timing couldn't be more damning. On one day, a former FBI director gets arraigned for allegedly making false statements to Congress. The very next day, the current Attorney General sits in the same room and, according to Whitehouse, makes her own demonstrably false statements. The irony isn't just striking, it's instructive about how power protects itself. Let's break down what Whitehouse actually documented. First, he exposed how the Attorney General made checkable false claims about campaign contributions. This wasn't a matter of interpretation or nuance. The Federal Election Commission keeps public records. An intern could have verified the truth in minutes. Yet she made the allegation anyway, knowing it was verifiable and knowing it was false. This reveals something crucial about how officials operate when they think accountability doesn't apply to them. But the deeper problem Whitehouse identified was the protection racket. He showed how the Attorney General had the chance to clarify the FBI director's previous testimony about grand jury proceedings. Patel had claimed he couldn't discuss his testimony because of Department of Justice sealing and court orders. When challenged, the chief judge of the D.C. federal court said that wasn't true. Nothing prevented Patel from discussing his testimony. The Attorney General could have set the record straight. Instead, she left him exposed, creating a pattern where false statements pile up without correction. This matters because it shows how institutional dishonesty compounds. When the FBI director claims court restrictions that don't exist, and the Attorney General refuses to clarify departmental policies, you create an environment where false statements become routine. Each lie enables the next one. Each evasion makes accountability harder to achieve. Whitehouse also highlighted the specific mechanics of how these false statements work. Patel claimed his grand jury transcript had been publicly released. That's a yes or no question. Either it's public or it isn't. When pressed, he couldn't produce the supposed public transcript because it doesn't exist. This isn't about legal complexity, it's about basic truthfulness. The ability to make verifiable false statements without consequence erodes the foundation of congressional oversight. The broader pattern Whitehouse identified touches on something fundamental about how power operates. When law enforcement leaders can make false statements about their own testimony, about court orders, about public records, they create a zone of unaccountability that extends far beyond any single hearing. Lying prosecutors see this. Career agents see this. They understand that if leadership can lie without consequence, then institutional integrity is performative, not real. What makes this particularly dangerous is how it normalizes dishonesty in law enforcement. When the people responsible for investigating false statements routinely make their own false statements, the message to the entire system is clear: truth is optional, accountability is selective, and institutional protection matters more than professional standards. Whitehouse's documentation forces a choice. Either Congress treats false statements as serious violations, regardless of who makes them, or it admits that oversight is just political theater. Either the Justice Department operates under the same standards it applies to others, or it acknowledges that it exists above the accountability it supposedly enforces. The consequences extend beyond any single hearing or investigation. When law enforcement leadership normalizes false statements, it creates a culture where accuracy becomes secondary to protection, where institutional loyalty trumps professional honesty, and where the people responsible for justice become the biggest obstacles to achieving it. This isn't about partisan advantage. It's about whether democratic institutions can maintain the credibility necessary to function. When the people enforcing the law routinely violate the standards they apply to others, the system isn't just hypocritical, it's fundamentally broken. Whitehouse's methodical exposure of these patterns wasn't just political criticism, it was institutional diagnosis of a justice system that's lost its way.